In May, we released our acclaimed investigative documentary, Who Killed Shireen, which grabbed global headlines when it uncovered the name of the Israeli soldier who killed Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in cold blood. If you've already seen the film, you will remember one key character who was able to pull back the curtain on the Biden administration's mishandling of Shireen's murder, the cover-up here in DC of what he said was an intentional killing by the Israeli soldier Alon Scargio. You may remember him for his words, but not his face, nor his name, because up until recently, both were not known. He was an anonymous source, but not anymore.
Would you say that the Biden administration failed Shireen Abu Akleh?
I would say so. The U.S. should have absolutely come forward and actually pressed the fact that an American citizen was killed intentionally by IDF.
Joining me now is the man behind the silhouette from that documentary, retired U.S. Army Colonel Steve Gabavics, who was the only U.S. military official to carry out the on-the-ground U.S. examination of Shireen Abu Akleh's killing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, Shireen was killed in May of 2022. Our film was released in May of 2025. You are revealing your identity to the world. Why and why now?
So 2 reasons in particular. The first one being, while I was still on active duty, was not an opportunity for me to do so based upon the previous positions I held and the responsibilities I had back to the service. So that's one reason why. The second reason, I believe that particularly after the documentary was released, that it becomes very necessary that we have to be able to hold Israel accountable for the actions through the administration or through other ways, through Leahy or other aspects, to stop giving them the aid that we give them, to hold units accountable for the actions they have. And we can see very clearly with the Dudavon unit and the indiscriminate killing and targeting of Shireen Abu Akleh and others, that something has to be done.
Yes, the Duvdevan unit was at the heart of the film, the Special Forces unit from which this soldier, Alon Scargio, took his shot. It took our reporter, Dion Nissenbaum, the lead investigator in the film, months to find someone in the Biden administration who was willing to speak out on the US investigation into Shireen's killing. Were you actively looking to speak out at the time, or did Dion's outreach encourage you to do so, plant a seed in your mind?
So I had thought about it for a long time. I had wanted to speak about it for a very long time. It had sat on my conscience for literally years since her killing in May of 2022. So when I heard word that Dion was doing this through another source, I reached out to Dion to talk to him about it.
So explain to our viewers, Shireen is killed in May of 2022. What are you doing at that moment? What is your role? What is your task? How do you end up investigating this?
So I am the Chief of Staff for the Office of the United States Security Coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority at the time. But I'm also a 30-year military police officer, 27 at that point in time, so I have a career background in law enforcement. So in that capacity, when the United States was not going to pick up any type of looking at the investigation from the FBI or another way, I was tasked to do so on behalf of the United States with the USSC and also on behalf of the embassy.
And General Michael Fenza was the U.S. Security Coordinator at the time, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So you are the U.S. military official who carries out the on-the-ground U.S. examination. What does on-the-ground mean? Where did you get to go?
So I actually had a little team that we put together, which included a Royal Canadian Mounted Police senior investigator who was also a homicide detective previously, and one of the lawyers from the USSC. And we covered everything we possibly could at the time. So this included meeting with the Attorney General and looking at all the evidence that the Palestinian Authority had, to include their actual investigation and the autopsy as well. We went to Jenin itself, re-walked the exact location of where the incident happened, to include doing straight line trajectory, monitoring how the bullets would have gone from any potential shooter from where we knew the Israeli units were at to where Shireen was at. We looked at the optical components of it to where they were standing at, to include having people in blue vests down at the end of the road and us standing at 190 meters away, so we could see the visual of what it looked like on that day. And it was a clear, beautiful day when we were out there as well, just like it was on May 11th of 2022. And we did this almost exactly 1 week after her killing, when we were out there. Then we also got feedback from the IDF with their story of where they were and their layout of what their forces were, which includes exactly how their Group 2 was sitting on the road, looking to the north and to the south in the area where Shireen Abu Akleh was killed.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism. Did you get any cooperation from Israeli forces on the ground?
Israeli forces were not extremely forthcoming. They gave us a readout of what their operations were, nothing in relation to what had actually happened that day, except for their initial response back saying that it was likely Palestinian gunmen who had killed her, which we saw change over time.
What was the assessment you submit to General Michael Fenzel, the U.S. Security Coordinator, when you come back from Jenin? And what does he say in response?
So our initial assessment, I would have given the assessment probably about on the 19th or 20th after looking through everything in detail. And I passed this to both Ambassador Nides and Lieutenant General Fenzel, that my findings were beyond a reasonable doubt that this was an intentional killing of Shireen Abu Akleh.
This is on the 19th or 20th of May, 2022.
Yes.
This is within 10 days
Yes.
of her killing.
Yes.
You, on behalf of the United States government, are saying that beyond reasonable doubt, that's a legal standard in a criminal court.
Yes, it is.
She was intentionally killed.
Correct.
Not accidentally, not crossfire, not collateral damage.
Correct.
And what does he say?
So he said at that point in time that he had heard from General Fuchs the day that the incident happened.
This is an Israeli general?
An Israeli general. He was the Central Command commander. That General Fuchs came and told him that it was very possibly that an Israeli soldier had killed him, or had killed her, sorry, but that it was an accident, that it was a matter of tragic circumstances. But that was the story that he stuck to. He said, General Fuchs told me this, so I believe it was not intentional.
So the U.S. general takes the word of a foreign general over his own officer who he's sent to investigate.
That is correct.
How did you feel about that?
I felt very disappointed and upset about that, and I continued to try to convince him throughout for the next 2 years, honestly, as we continue to work on the investigation for it. And I'll jump forward a little bit. So when we got to July, I was still trying to talk with him, trying to present things. Like I said, I had also told Ambassador Nides the same thing, said it was beyond a reasonable doubt. That when the report came out from the State Department on the 4th of July, stating that it was a tragic accident, you know, unfortunate circumstances, I was basically heartbroken. I was extremely angry that that became the official standing of the United States government at that point in time, because I had really thought up to that point in time that we would be able to convince everybody involved, based upon the evidence that existed, that they would hold Israel accountable for actually targeting and killing Shireen Abu Akleh.
An American citizen, lest we forget.
American citizen.
Why do you think General Fenzel rejected your assessment?
I think it came down to two different things. I think part of it was the relationships that he thought may be impacted or affected if we came out and said that the Israelis had intentionally killed an American citizen, both the relationship with the IDF and with other people within the government of Israel. And then also the fact that he had his relationship with General Fuchs, and he believed that relationship was extremely important, so he accepted that finding from General Fuchs that it was an accident.
You told Dion in our documentary anonymously that, quote, what it came down to was different pressure within the administration to try not to anger the government of Israel too much by trying to force their hand at saying that they'd intentionally killed Shireen. What kind of pressure are we talking about here?
So I fully believe, especially the engagements with the State Department, that no one at that point in time wanted to hold the government of Israel accountable. And you saw that
They
dynamic.
want to brush it under the carpet.
I think they wanted to brush it under the carpet. They still kept it on the very low level of things and discussions. Obviously, after July 4th, it completely died out. No one was covering it all from the State Department after that time. But what you saw from when Biden first came out and said, when it was thought to be a Palestinian gunman, that we will hold them accountable. We will find who this is. And then as things continued to proceed out, that it was most likely an Israeli in the IDF who killed her, that died off.
You mentioned President Biden. Obviously, the U.S. government is massive, a lot of bureaucracy. He's the commander-in-chief, but he doesn't see everything.
Correct.
Do you believe he saw your report, was aware of your report, was aware that your finding was different to what General Fenzel and General Fuchs from Israel were saying?
I sincerely doubt that he did.
Okay. General Fenzel says that your visit to the site was not an investigation, just a fact-finding mission. Is that how you describe it?
That is not how I described it. So he wanted to say regularly that we are not doing an investigation, but everything we did procedurally was an investigation. Looking at all the different evidence that was there, looking at all the documents that were there, all the videos, and actually walking and doing everything on the site. So there'd be no different than that than doing any type of investigation otherwise.
Just to remind our viewers, you said you were a former military police officer.
That's correct.
So you brought people to trial.
I oversaw numerous different investigations that...
Murders? Killings?
There were murders, there was treason, there was everything else. So I was a provost marshal for here in the National Capital Region.
So when you say beyond
places,
reasonable doubt, you kind of know what you're talking about.
Yes.
You've dealt with this stuff. You're not making kind of wild accusations without knowing the severity of them.
Correct.
You're saying that based on over 2 decades as a military policeman.
That is
you
correct.
go there, you look at the scene, and you say she was intentionally killed. The New York Times, when they were covering our documentary after it came out, and your allegations in the film, they spoke to, quote, senior US official familiar with the report, who said its conclusions were never altered, and that American officers, which I assume includes you, were unable to reach a definitive conclusion on the soldier's exact line of sight. Are both General Fenzel and this senior US official lying?
So, well, I can definitively say that at least one U.S. officer had a definitive finding on that.
You?
Yes, as well as others within the organization as well, who would corroborate exactly what I'm saying from the findings that we had. So that statement irritated me plenty, because I know that statement also says that I was not privy to all the information. I worked this thing nonstop until the final report came out in March of 2024. So I was.
So the only thing
involved.
you think you weren't part of was the conversations between American and Israeli generals?
Yes.
Everything else.
And there were
you
other
part of.
things where there were conversations back with like Barbara Leaf and others in the State
But there
Department.
wasn't
that
some
were privy.
secret ballistics report that you didn't see that Fenzel saw or
No,
someone else saw?
Nothing at all.
We got to address the elephant in the room as well when it comes to the US approach to this whole thing. How did you know? Let me just ask you now. Did you know that Alon Skagio was the name of the Israeli soldier who shot?
I did not.
How is it possible that our team, and we have a great team, award-winning journalists, District Bear Films, Dion Nissenbaum, made the documentary for Zateo, but were able to find the name of Shireen Abu Akleh's killer 3 years after her murder within a few weeks of beginning their investigation on this documentary. And yet the US government, with the US military and the FBI and the CIA, all the power of the State Department and the Pentagon, they couldn't get this name, and Zateo did. How does that make sense to our viewers?
I think the only thing I can say is that there was not a significant effort by the U.S. government
They
to
didn't
find
want
that.
to. Well, it wasn't that they
Right.
couldn't, they didn't want to.
Right, that's what I believe. I know we were not getting anything back from our standpoint, from the military standpoint, from the USSC on information of who the shooter might be. They refused to give us any of the information. So that at that point in time, there was no real pressure from our side. We expected if anything was going to happen would be from the State Department or from the Pentagon, but there was nothing that we ever saw that transpired afterwards requesting who that shooter was from the IDF.
We mentioned Joe Biden. You said he probably didn't ever see your initial report. What is your assessment of his handling of this story as a whole? This is a guy who claimed to be the great comforter in chief. This is the guy who famously made a statement when US soldiers were killed in Jordan by an Iranian-backed militia: if you harm Americans, we will respond. This is a man who, as you said, after Shireen was killed and they thought it was a Palestinian, said, we need accountability. How do you think he handled all of this? When it turns out it was the Israelis, and in the film we hear from Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli Prime Minister's national security advisor, saying he never raised it with the Prime Minister of Israel. You, as an American military officer investigating the killing of an American citizen journalist, what do you make of the handling of it by the American president?
I was very disappointed. I believe absolutely we have the power within the United States and with the presidency to actually do something diplomatically and within, influencing different nations. We're the only ones that can really do that, to influence things with the government of Israel. And our failing to do that is disappointing for every American out there in my mind, because it would have been so easy for President Biden to call Naftali Bennett and say, this is unacceptable. We know that an Israeli soldier did this. We are going to hold that unit accountable, and we expect you to bring him to justice. And something would have happened.
We have the Leahy law that you mentioned earlier, Senator Patrick Leahy, who came up with that law, which basically says if you know that a foreign military unit has committed human rights abuses, there should be no American aid going off. It should be cut off to that unit. The Biden administration did do some targeted sanctions of some settlers. They talked about cutting off aid to Israeli units in the West Bank, but didn't go through with it. Now you've got the Trump administration, which is hardcore pro-Israel and pro-settler Israel. Can anything be done in terms of funding cuts, legal approaches to holding the Israeli military accountable? Is it too late?
I don't think it's too late. I think it needs to remain in the discussions continuously going forward. We need to get it into congressional realm so we continue to talk these different things so it doesn't die away. Or even, potentially, maybe the current administration would like to do something because the Biden administration did not. That may be an option. I don't know. I know we will not do things that relates to Gaza, but we see day in and day out the indiscriminate killing of people in the West Bank. and somebody has to hold it accountable. So the biggest thing is it cannot drop off of our radar, and we have to be able to continue to talk about this until something is done.
You served in the US military, you served in the US government, you've served at quite a high level with some senior people around you. Based on your years in government and military, why do you think the United States is so unwilling to stand up to Israel, a foreign nation, even when an American citizen is killed by that foreign nation?
I think what it comes down to is our alliances that we have with the nations, that we determine that that military alliance is more important than an individual. I think that's what it comes down to overall. As we well know, Israel is more or less a proxy for the U.S. government as it relates to Iran. So that's always been part of that give and take as it relates to our arms deals with them and intelligence sharing. So I think that was the foundational aspect of why we were not willing to take or have them hold responsibility for killing an American, because we did not want to upset the apple cart, shall we say, between the relationships between Israel and the United States.
And you and I have just met today. I have no idea what your politics are, but I noticed that American public opinion has turned quite radically against Israel. Pew is reporting that a majority of Americans are not happy with Israel, are not fans of Israel. You see polling that even conservatives are getting upset with Israel in terms of it's not in our national interest to send all this money there. You have media figures like Tucker Carlson now taking a strong line critical of Israel. Things seem to be changing. I wonder in the military, I'm not talking about General Fenzel levels, I'm talking about lower level officers and ordinary troops, people who've served in the Middle East. Again, you're not speaking for everyone, just anecdotally, what's your experience been of you and your colleagues' role of the American position in the Middle East and our alliance with Israel?
So I think generally speaking, we have pretty good relationships with the government of Israel. I've done a lot of things with U.S. Central Command and U.S. European Command prior to the transitional changing. And really prior to the wars, and without really getting into the things with the escalation in the West Bank prior to 2021, there was a very good impression and feeling of the capabilities of the IDF soldiers, and it was a good relationship across the board. I think a lot of that has deteriorated now based upon seeing the fighting in Gaza, seeing the fighting in with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and what's transpired really over the past 3 years in the West Bank. I think right now, in my personal opinion, the best reliability and assessment would be with the Air Force, where there's still a very, very capable Air Force. But I think what we've seen, particularly since October 7th and really going back years now, has been the progression that the IDF and the rest of Israel has turned much more anti-Palestinian. And they have no current concerns or qualms with going in there and taking the occupation to really not an occupation, but more of an annexation.
I got to ask, I hate to ask this question, but unfortunately we live in the country we live in right now. You have come out from behind the silhouette. You're publicly talking about this stuff, doing media interviews. Are you worried that this particular administration, the Trump administration, which is very, very unhappy about whistleblowers and people who say stuff they don't like hearing, do you think they might come after you?
I certainly think it's a possibility, and that's one reason why I was, tempered by coming out. But ultimately, what I believe in is I believe in the United States. I believe in our ability to do what needs to be done the right way. And I think ultimately when the story is fully understood and they can see what transpired in the death of an American and how it was handled, I think even this administration will clearly see that there is an opportunity still to be able to do something to hold somebody accountable for the death of an American citizen. And I do believe this administration is very strong also, as Biden had stated, about we will hold you accountable if you kill Americans. So I'm hoping that that will come true.
We can only hope. Retired U.S. Army Colonel Steve Gabavics, thank you for your time. Thank you for speaking out. And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.